Okay, last little bit of notes here. So, in 2012, the Mexican presidential election saw potentially the rebirth of the PRI. The PRI had lost the two previous presidential elections, first to Vicente Fox in 2000, and then to Felipe Calderón in 2006. However, Calderón's presidency was marked by turmoil and violence as he started a hardcore crackdown against the cartels, essentially the Mexican war on drugs. Now, these crackdowns against narcotraficantes and against the cartels did not go well for Calderon's government at all. Not at all. And as a result, people became increasingly concerned that the PAN and Calderon were unable to get the violence under control. And so they went back to the PRI. Now, the PRI had that reputation for, first of all, essentially running a dictatorship for 80 years, and also for having, directly fraudulently conducted a number of elections, especially in 1988. However, there was this notion that the PRI also got things done, and that it was sort of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. So in 2012, you saw the election of the fellow over here on the right, that is Enrique Peña Nieto, and he was fairly young, pretty charismatic, and he had this notion that he was going to rebuild the PRI into a modern political party that was upright and anti-corruption. And what you see here is that the electorate is willing to swing back and forth between different parties. They're fairly fluid in terms of their political identity. And EPN, as he was known, Enrique Peña Nieto, was seen initially as sort of this face of hope and sort of the resurgence of the PRI in a more respectable, modern, honest, and forthright way. However, while he did win the presidency in 2012, the PRI lost the majority in Mexico's legislative bodies, which meant that he was, from the moment of his inception as president, dealing with divided government. This led to a lot of political stagnation. He wasn't able to get a number of legislative agenda across. Beyond that, EPN's presidency was marked by plagues with corruption, both personal with regards to his family and a lot of real estate issues, as well as questions about his ability to manage cartel violence any better than Calderon had starting in 2006. Essentially, EPN's presidency was one scandal after another. You had the murder of 43 college students at a teaching college, and subsequent concerns about government cover-ups. You had a very, very difficult time getting any sort of transparency across. EPN was dealing with sort of the fallout, the results of the Great Recession, the results of that, and he didn't have a particularly coherent sort of economic policy that was beneficial to most Mexicans. As such, whoops, sorry about the leave that bullet point there. It's kind of funny floating on its own. As such, the election in 2018, the most recent presidential election in Mexico, resulted in the election of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, the fellow who very nearly won the presidency in 2006 and then swore himself in as president, at least symbolically. So, AMLO, as he is known, did not run as a member of the PRI, although he used to be a member of the PRI. AMLO is a really difficult sort of person to categorize in terms of his politics. He is definitely leftist. He probably is best described as a nationalist and populist, although his policies are kind of like nailing jello to a wall. He formerly had been a member of the PRI back in the 80s, well, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And then he moved to the PRD, the Partido Revolucionario Democrática. Today, he is a member of his own political alliance called Morena. Excuse me, there's a typo there. That should not be Morena, it should be Morena, like brown hair. But it's an pseudo-acronym for the Movimiento de la Regeneración Nacional. So Mo from movimiento, re from regeneración, and na from nacional. So Morena. Sorry about the D there. I'll go back and fix that. So yeah, he became this leader of a new political movement. And AMLO won the 2018 presidency handily, quite outright, with 53% of the popular vote, and he is the first candidate to win with an outright majority since 1988. And of course, the election of 1988 was the one where se cayó el sistema, where the system collapsed. So as far as we can tell, the election in 2018 was relatively clean, and AMLO seems to have legitimately won. Part of that is because by the end of his presidency, EPN was deeply, deeply mired in corruption scandals and deeply unpopular with most Mexicans. AMLO's policy agenda was also really interesting and spoke to a lot of goals, especially that young Mexicans had. So he really took on the notion of being sort of the anti-corruption candidate. Whether or not that is the case is a different matter all entirely. But he made a number of really sweeping promises about increasing financial aid for students, essentially getting rid of student college debt, that sort of stuff, increased pensions for the elderly. So he was targeting both the old and the young, which together does you a lot of favors in terms of building a political cohort. He also ran on a platform of ending the war on drugs. Essentially stepping back from the militarization of the Mexican police force and trying to address some of the underlying problems that lead people to join cartels or to involve themselves in narco trafficking. And that has included for AMLO, he's made the argument that that legalization of some drugs like marijuana in particular would be a step in the right direction to try and limit the hold that the cartels have over populations. He has not been thus far particularly successful at this, but his presidency is still pretty young. It's in the second real year of it. He has doubled down on the idea of using oil as a way of trying to get Mexico's economy out of its reliance on narco trafficking. And so he's pushed for the construction of more oil refineries. And if you're paying attention to the news right now, you might know something about Mexico holding up an OPEC decision that occurred like Friday, which is kind of a big deal. And Mexico's more of a player on the international oil market than you might think. He's also pushed for a decentralization of government departments that is moving key government jobs out of Mexico City and into states. And by that way, sort of like practicing a sort of form of devolution, right? Giving increased power to local municipalities and state legislative bodies. Jury's out on AMLO right now. People haven't really come to a conclusion about whether or not he's particularly effective. Like I said, he's definitely a populist. A lot of what he says resonates. But we're very interested to see how he handles the COVID-19 outbreak right now with regards to Mexican policies. So far, hit or miss. But so too has pretty much everybody's. So that takes us up to the present in terms of Mexican political history. It's a short overview, even though we've done it over like 3 or 4 days here, because Mexican political history is complicated. But we are going to move on tomorrow and the rest of this week into the political structure of Mexico, and talk about how the system works. Okay, so have a good day, and I will talk to y'all tomorrow.